So please give him a warm welcome to Startup Day, Gustaf Josefsson.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a call on the way here, and like, yeah, can you give a talk? I'm like, 15 minutes? Yeah, I guess. So I'm going to do that, see what I can come up with. I have this photo. This is me. Start from the beginning. This is me in front of my Mac SE. And I found this picture a couple of years ago, and I realized that the bus speed of this computer, that's the bus speed is like the speed between the processor and the memory. So the speed between the two most important parts in the computer. The bus speed of this computer is the same speed as today's 4G network. So the two most important parts inside this computer were talking to each other at the same speed as this thing is talking to Google servers while it's in my pocket or in my tights. and we still talk about that thing as a computer. But most people fail to realize that this is just a component. That this is just a part of a computer. That this is a part of the fastest computer we've ever built, the most rapidly expanding, most accessible by most people computer that's never crashed since we turned it on, and that looks a little bit like this. So there it is, the internet. It looks strangely organic, doesn't it? It's like the thing I think when I see this, that this was clearly not planned, right? And that is true. This wasn't planned. Like that's an essential fact of the internet. That the American Department of Defense at some point decided, hey guys, how about we let anyone plug in whatever they want without having to ask for permission? Really? Like the US Department of Defense decides that anyone can plug in anything without having to ask for permission? It's like some radical anarchist idea that like snuck its way into the DoD. And this became the foundation of the open network, the foundation of the interconnected networks. And indeed, when CERN decided to release their software in 1994, the World Wide Web, they decided on the same principles, that anyone should be able to hyperlink wherever they want without having a central authority or central control system. It's the basic idea. It's the foundation of the whole startup boom, the whole entrepreneurial revolution, the whole digital revolution, is the idea that anyone can do what they want without having to ask for permission. Yeah. So, what does that mean? What happened? Because this network is now like overlaid us. It's like if you can just squint with your eyes, and you can look around, you can see how this network is in this room. How it like goes from pocket to pocket to pocket to handbag to, and this vibration thing are actually like interconnected with our nervous system in real time. It's right here, right now, overlaid in this room. And so I'm not going to do the long talk about artificial intelligence, because yeah, the artificial intelligence is going to take over. You know, it's going to be smarter than us. It's the singularity, and we're not going to understand the speed of the revolution and That's going to happen. Unfortunately, that talk was canceled today. But I would argue that we are already controlled by the artificial intelligence. That this is not, at some point we'll realize, oh, the artificial intelligence is taking over. Oh no, stop it. It's already happened. And it's been happening for hundreds of years. So the artificial intelligence, the word artificial comes from Latin for handicraft. It means that it's a crafted intelligence. That means that someone who is intelligent, who's endowed with intelligence, is using his intelligence to create something that is less intelligent. That's a system defined by limited numbers of rules, limited number of boxes where you can put everything into, and that will explain all of it. That's the artificial intelligence. It's our hubris to believe that we can describe the world, the universe, in simple systems. And the one that's ruling us right now looks a bit something like this. This is like Napoleon's army. Like Napoleon realized that by now people can actually read and write. So that means that I can make very clear role descriptions of what people do in this organization so that I can make them replaceable, just like an Uber driver. And then I make very clear lines of communication, who talks to whom, right? So when I'm on the field, I gather a bunch of information. And then I know if I'm going to act locally or if I'm going to pass it on. And the next person gets information from multiple sources and then knows if they're going to act locally or pass it on. And then it goes up the pyramid. And then you can make a decision and put it down there. And what he did was effectively making 600,000 people spread across an entire continent into one computer that can gather vast amount of data over a large geographical area and make executive decisions, centralized executive decisions that affect the entirety. It's fucking brilliant, right? It's the foundation of how we built our organizations in the Industrial Revolution. Command and control and predictability and replaceability. And it's just, you know, it's great and it's still needed to some extent, but it kind of assumes that, you know, this person here can't pick up the phone and call that person there. That's why in some organizations, people actually get pissed off if you call the wrong person, because you're supposed to go through me. And it assumes that this person can't ask a question on a hashtag, and then some other person in this pyramid over here can ask the question instead. You know, or just look it up in the knowledge management system. So this is under the assumption that we're in a completely different technological age. And as we make it easier to interact with each other, organizations, networks, societies start looking a little bit more like this. Like, this is the de facto organization today. And yes, some of them are hired here, and some of them are, this guy there is in charge of her. But there are some people who are outside of the organizations who are clients that are actually more powerful than some people inside the organization. Not to mention the fact that these two people over there, they're playing tennis together and they're sleeping together, right? Those are having an affair over there. Like, this is the de facto organizational chart of our society today. We still like to squeeze it into this thing, like, oh, because we like control, right? We like to be able to describe stuff into things. But this is how it looks. It actually looks a little bit more like this. And, you know, looking around a little bit outside the human world, it's not hard to realize that this might be more natural look on how things actually evolves if they're allowed to evolve. So in this squeezed talk, I'm going to try to talk about how an evolutionary organization looks like. So basically, I'm going to introduce the experimental method, self-leadership, and openness as three attributes of how these networks actually strengthen, how they become resilient. So to start from self-leadership, if you look at the network, each node needs to be able to take care of itself. Like in Burning Man, it's called radical self-reliance. If you can't take care of your fucking self out in the desert, like, it's all going to break down. So we have to start from each person being able to be in charge of themselves. And we can do that because we have this cool thing. Life Before Google, a short story. I just thought of something I'd like to know more about. That's a damn shame. I was like, do you get this? Like, when my dad asked Grandpa something and Grandpa couldn't answer, my dad would have to take the bicycle to the library. But what does that mean? That an entire generation, like 3 billion people, are growing up with the Library of Alexandria in their pocket, like the gathered knowledge of all of humanity. And not just the knowledge of Wikipedia, but the skills that can be trained through YouTube, or be able to go to, you know, MIT's webpage and take a course in system development. I mean, they can, of course, if they're allowed by the government, they can take the same course from like Kristianstad högskola, but they can also do it like today without having to ask permission from the government from MIT. So we can actually start trusting each other more. We can actually start trusting each other to, if you actually just have the process for seeking advice, for listening to others, then maybe we can trust you to make your own decisions. So that's like the node. But then each node needs to be able to take new connections, right? And that's the revolutionary idea of the experimental method. So, when things are slow enough, you can kind of plan. Like if you have a lot of predictable variables, you can say like, oh, it's like this now, so it's going to be like this later. So then we can plan the process from A to B. The business plan that was very popular 20 years ago. But it assumes the idea that the world is fairly predictable, that there are not too many unpredictable variables. Fortunately, we have a new method, it's been around for 500 years. It's called the scientific method. It's been rebranded now as agile or lean, but it's the same idea. You have a hypothesis, you do an experiment, and you learn something, so you can revise your hypothesis. Or, as we say in Silicon Valley speak, fail fast, fail cheap. So, I mean, that's the core to be able to have these networks spread, is to move the point of initiative to the individual. Like how Facebook allows basically each coder to be able to do their own A/B testing. So instead of having to ask for permission to try out a new idea, you try it out and then you go to the boss and say, hey, this idea actually worked. So it kind of shifted the idea of where initiative for innovation comes in an organization. And said that, it's not the R&D department over here, it's all of us that are doing it by experiment every day. And then finally, the bandwidth. Be able to have these connections between each of these nodes be more stable. Be able to exchange information faster. And that's openness. Openness can mean a lot of things. It can mean, maybe Facebook shouldn't have control over all of our civil society, of all of our political parties that are using it for political organizing, all of our companies that are using it to communicate. That's risky, to have all that in one bag. It means openness as in open networks, as in open data, as in open innovation, as in open source. But we're people. So openness also means to open ourselves up. Because as long as we put this Instagram face between us and everyone else, we can't really increase the actual bandwidth between us. And that's a part of Brooks here upstairs, just doing starting his talk with a silent meditation. Like Google trains their employees in meditation, because that's actually good for business. It's not just fun hippie stuff. But I'd like to describe this openness as fundamental trust. Trust for the unknown, trust for the network. And I describe it like this. To repeatedly choose to trust others more than you are comfortable with. This is actually the definition of trust. If I trust you just as much as I think you deserve, that's not trust. That's calculated risk. Trusting someone means having that little uncomfortable feeling in your stomach. Not knowing if you really want me well, or if you're really going to perform or achieve what you claim to. It's having that feeling and choosing to go with it anyway. and often getting, punched in the face, but then getting up the next morning and doing it again. And we live in a society that's one of the most trusting on earth. We live in a time that's the time of trust. But that process is still uncomfortable, because that's how you keep building it. You keep doing it despite not knowing for sure if you're actually going to be rewarded in the end. So that's scary. So be scared. So just to close off this thing, I like to think about it like the single-celled organisms that were floating around the big oceans. And they started clumping together and they started forming multicellular organisms because that was apparently advantageous. And then you could specialize. You could send chemicals so that they could communicate and they could specialize. So one would eat and one would poop, and that would be better. So they collaborated and they become more and more of them. And then at some point, some of these cells, they discovered electricity. They discovered that it was faster to communicate with electricity. And these were the neurons, the nerve cells. And they got so popular that they became more and more of them, and the whole central nervous system was formed, and all that thing, the thing we think we are now today, is that clump of cells that discovered electricity. So maybe we're on the same journey, because we started communicating with chemicals. We started using vibrations to send information from one cell to another, and then we also discovered electricity. And this might be nothing less than the central nervous system of humanity. The very thing that makes us a little bit less those single lonely cells on the big black ocean, and a little bit more into one being, one humanity, one consciousness. I mean, us trying to describe or talk about this or understand this is like our cells in the finger trying to describe me. It's why it always escapes us. This thing, call it consciousness, the internet, or God. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gustaf Josefsson. We're very, very lucky to have had you here as a surprise guest. But I'm sure a lot of people are really psyched that you were able to give that talk. We're just waiting for our next speaker. So we do have a bit of time for questions, if anyone would like to put any questions to Gustaf. I think there's a roaming mic somewhere around the room. Yes, there's a mic at the back. Any questions about the future, tech, collaboration, any of these themes we've been hearing about? Or anything else. He's open. He wants us to be open. Ask him whatever you like.
Whatever you like. I'm not very inviting.
Come on, be brave. Be brave, audience. I know it's almost beer time.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of one while I...
oh, you're trying to push them. Just so you can
no, but I mean, a lot of people are like, we've heard of all different kinds of entrepreneurs today, but your job is as a professional speaker, going into companies. So tell us how you got into that in the first place. It's always interesting to know how you get from there to here.
So I started my first business when I was in high school. So I've been in tech and web, and then my recent project, I ran a makerspace called Makers Park that was in Old Town that I ran for 3 years, co-working space, innovation space, event space. And over the last 6-7 years, I started talking first about kind of entrepreneurship and innovation, and then it got more into future stuff. Okay. And it evolves, and it's gone from like having 5 talks in a year to having 20 talks in a month. So now I do that. I'm still looking for like, what's my next startup? I closed my last one down last summer. So now I'm like, yeah, this is fun too. But like building things is also cool.
What do you love most and least about working for yourself?
So I really like doing things when I want to do them. I try to structure my life so I avoid leaving the room with a promise of stuff I should be doing later. So that it's actually happening in a constant process of this is needed or this is the setting where we work together. And I really like being able to shape that so that the work comes out of me whenever it comes out of me, because that doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah.
It is lonely. My last startup, we were a team of 3, which was my first startup that I founded with other people. And that was a lot nicer than the previous ones where I've been a lot alone. So yeah, I think if I do something again, that's a key thing. I don't want to redo the mistake of being the lone entrepreneur, but actually building a team who wants to go into it together.
Okay, so motivation to get mingling and look for your co-founders tonight at the Mingle, guys.
I'm up for ideas, so if you want to start something.
Yeah, brilliant. Gustaf Josefsson, thank you very much for coming here to Startup Day.